we have the treaty, we have guidelines, we have our regulations, but we also need the court to tell us how the court sees things. So it's an opportunity to learn how to push things forward. And of course, every time, no matter if we win or we lose, we analyze the ruling very, very carefully in order to learn from it. And one of the things I've learned over these 7 years, not being a lawyer myself, is that it's really important to be prudent on procedures, because it's quite rare that we lose on substance of a case. It's much more often that we lose on procedural points. So of course, this is one of the things where we're very, very specific that things must be done also procedurally by the book, which is why I appreciate that we have, the advice from our legal service. We have the independent hearing officers where parties can go raise complaints if they find that things are not sufficiently dealt with.
Well, could you help our audience understand what you mean by procedural? When these cases have fallen down for procedural reasons, what kind of things are we talking about? Are there any examples?
Well, it could be that, for instance, we have had state aid cases that has fallen because the courts thought that we should have opened sort of a formal investigation instead of finding a solution with the member state in question, that we should have, more doubts. It could be issues of access to file not being handled in what should be the proper way. So, it is sort of the procedural steps, how to move things forward. Should this have been a supplementary statement of objection rather than a letter of fact? Sometimes we have also cases during an investigation questioning basically every step we take. So the procedural takes up a lot of our efforts, as it should, of course, because that is part of the party's right to defend themselves.
Great. So onto another kind of newsy topic. I want to ask you about one of the few big European tech platforms, Spotify, which is a Swedish music streamer. It's obviously been in the news recently because it's got a fairly controversial podcast host called Joe Rogan, who some think has been spreading vaccine misinformation through his very large audience. It has similarities to the types of complaints that the Commission has had with some of the big American platforms. So, I mean, do you see Spotify as coming squarely under the kind of, the scope of the DMA, I guess, and a lot of the kind of, it would fall within your purview, I guess. And can you kind of assure the American groups that you're going to pursue one of Europe's own companies as aggressively as you would an American one?
Oh, but our legislation doesn't know your home country. It knows your market behavior in the European market where we have jurisdiction. That's the important point. And I think you'd actually see that some US companies, they're more successful in Europe than in the US when you look at their market share. So Europe is open for business, no matter where you come from, as long as you're following the European rulebook. And that, of course, goes for Spotify as well. I think the issue in question here, it would be more obvious for Spotify to be part of the code of conduct. We have strengthened the code of conduct where all big platforms have signed up in order to police what is unlawful or illegal online to be taken down. And of course, all of that to be strengthened with another piece of legislation called the Digital Services Act, which addresses how services should be provided within the European Union, and what responsibility you have as a platform to have a system on the one hand side to take down what is flagged to you to be illegal, while at the same time having a system where people can complain about to say, well, I may have hurt you, but this is not hate speech, so this is actually legal for me to say it. That balance, to have those systems in place, I think that would be more sort of the kind of question that could be asked for Spotify, because the Digital Services Act would not only be for gatekeepers, that would be also for larger platforms to oblige these different obligations.
Okay, great. So more kind of broader question. You have a reputation as being very tough on big tech. But if you look at the track record, there is actually quite a few acquisitions by the really big US players. Thinking of Google Fitbit, Microsoft Nuance, recently Facebook, now called Meta, was allowed to buy a small company called Customer. Someone who's not following the antitrust kind of ins and outs very closely and isn't reading all these cases might be a bit surprised that Commissioner Vestager is allowing these things to happen. Could you kind of explain, what is it? Are you totally relaxed about these types of deals, or is it that your hands are tied and ideally you might not like them to go ahead, but you don't have the proper legal instruments or legal standing in order to stop them?
Well, actually, in these cases, we have found solutions to the concerns that we would have, and we have gone into great detail. So, not only the sort of the first phase of merger procedures, but in-depth analysis. And if you take the Google Fitbit case, so Fitbit I think is 4% of the European market, so a very small player when it comes to health tracking, and here. We took commitments to sort of solve the concerns that we had, because it could be a concern when a giant buys a health tracker that they would sort of foreclose that no one else could use the operating system, the Android operating system of the phone. So that concern was solved by saying we will keep an open API for other health trackers. Another concern could be that, oh wow, a powerful advertising you can do if you combine health data with other data that you have on people, their search pattern, what else they do, localization. And that was solved by saying you need to put health data in a silo. They cannot be used for advertising purposes. So what we are doing is to try to find also novel solutions to competition problems in order to be able for this market to move ahead. So that we are balanced, that we do not see a market consolidation where there is no market consolidation, but enables the market to move on. And I think the Google Fitbit with a data silo, with an open API, with the necessary belt and braces for that open API to be really open, I think it is possible to find a solution.
And you don't worry that they're famously hard to monitor, these kind of behavioral remedies, right? And do you feel like, presumably you do, but do you feel like you have enough kind of a window into these companies after the fact? So, I mean, there was a famous example where Facebook told you it would do something, and then you subsequently found that they hadn't kept their promises, basically.
No, that was the Facebook case was a case of misleading information. They said they wouldn't combine data in a way that we thought they might have done, and for that misleading information, we fined them 110 million euros. But misleading information is different from taking commitments that are legally binding on you, and where there will be someone to monitor them. And I think it's important to look at solutions to competition problems more in a spectrum instead of just two boxes, either structural or behavioral. Because when you're in sort of data issues, well, having a data silo is a semi-structural remedy. Having real open APIs, that will be tested every day when those who need an open API will be trying to get it. So we get immediate feedback from the market if this doesn't work.
Okay. And there was an idea, just speaking about, where is the bar in clearing deals, there was an idea doing the rounds for a while about flipping the burden of proof in these kind of deals. I think it may have been in a big digital competition policy report that you commissioned by some experts. This idea of saying, actually, if you want to do a deal, you have to prove to us that it's not anti-competitive, rather than us having to prove that it's competitive. What do you think of that idea?
Well, I don't necessarily think that it's a bad idea, but that is de facto the back and forth that we have. When we look into a deal, we analyze it. We look at what is the market situation. We may have concerns that this will harm competition. Then, of course, the company can say, no. There will be efficiencies. It will not work as you say. You got the facts wrong. So there is this back and forth. And even if you turned the table, we would still have to assess the arguments.
You
So
might end up having the same conversation anyway, just with a
I,
different
I don't
starting point.
I don't think it's a silver bullet.
Yeah. Okay, that's really useful. And I just want to remind the audience that you can ask questions. I think we've had some good ones through, but don't forget about the questions. Sticking on the big tech theme for a second, for a really long time, I was writing about your cases, and it was kind of in a global vacuum almost. There wasn't you were really kind of doing something different. That global competition and antitrust context has completely changed in the past few years. We've seen a huge kind of crackdown in China, and perhaps more relevant for what you're doing, you've seen enormous amount of investigations launched out of the US. How is that context going to change your job and the job of the people that do your job after you do it? Will you have to kind of communicate with these foreign regulators? Will be some areas that you would leave to the Americans? Is anything off the table? Or do you just keep kind of, going on blinkers as if nothing has changed?
Well, first and foremost, this is a great development because when we don't have a global competition law, we don't have global competition law enforcement. But if you are to make sure that consumers all over this planet has the benefit of competitive markets, well, then of course we need a lot of jurisdictions to do things that supplement and complement one another. So I think that when I draw sort of my map, I have a map, I put a little red dot when another investigation is opening by the Australians, by the South Koreans, by the Canadians, by the Americans, by the South Africans, also here in Europe, by the Italians or the Germans. I say we're getting there because the market situation is different in different jurisdictions. We have slightly different legislation in different jurisdictions, but we're in it with the same mission: to keep markets open, contestable, that there's a drive for innovation, for affordable prices, and of course it changes how we work, and it changes also our discussions. From the very first days, I have been discussing our cases with colleagues all over the planet, and the better way we have, of course, the more we can exchange and learn from one another, which I think is beneficial not only for us as law enforcers, but also for the businesses in question, so that there is a learning from everyone. So of course it changes, but we still have the obligation in our jurisdiction to make sure that we vigilantly apply competition law.
So would you wouldn't not pursue something because you saw the Americans pursuing a similar case, for example?
But it's really difficult to answer in general because it would depend on the market situation.
Yeah.
And that is really tricky to say sort of as a general remark.
And just speaking of this kind of global, patchwork of investigations, I mean, is there a danger of, maybe it'd be more efficient if everyone moved in lockstep and you sort of have this kind of slightly messy picture sometimes where it's kind of hard to, someone's doing something on, whatever app store fees over there, and someone else is thinking more, big picture about whether so-and-so should be broken up. Do you worry about that kind of like legal fragmentation, I guess, of antitrust? And while I'm sure you welcome the fact that more regulators are like-minded now, is there a downside in that possible kind of, everyone's doing something different?
Well, I think we are very far from over-enforcement. I think we are just in the process of correcting under-enforcement. Because, of course, we have all had to learn about digital markets, how data works, take our sort of traditional theories of harm, update those to see what is really going on in this marketplace. And I don't see it as fragmentation. Actually, I see it as a puzzle coming together to say that with different market situations, there is a coming together of a more aligned global approach to what should be the rules of the game in more and more digitalized markets. And it's really important that it happens now when everything digitalizes. So you have the digitization outside of what was sort of natively digital in agriculture, in transport, in energy. Of course, it had it in finance for a long time. It's really important that competition authorities is then, up to speed. And I think here we're helping each other and we're learning from one another.
That's great. I just want to ask you a little bit about something a bit closer to industrial policy, which I know kind of touches on your digital remit. There's you often hear, it's a problem that Europe doesn't have many $100 billion tech companies. What do you think about that? I mean, every day we use American software, which runs on American designed chips and devices that are made in Asia. But the premise of the bloc's industrial policy is almost that we need to change this. So how are Europeans losing from the status quo?
Well, sort of on a day-to-day basis, we get excellent products, and prices have come down on hardware to a degree that many people can afford it. That is what has happened over the last 10-15 years, where digitization was exclusively for the few who could afford it. It was tricky, it was unapproachable, to the situation today where smartphones is in the hands of everyone. You have a lot of sort of much more intuitive systems for people to use. You have a completely different level of convenience in your daily life because of technology. And I don't think that could have happened without the market dynamics that we have seen over the last 10 to 15 years. So I think it's a different thing that is at stake here, and we have seen it during the pandemic and with the follow-on chip shortage. That in Europe we have a wish of having a bigger footprint in the global value chain when it comes to technology, not to exclude anyone, but to be a much more assertive part of it. Because important assets are held in Europe, in the chips industry, world-class research, and also essential chip-producing machines are produced in Europe. To be sort of more assertive about what we would do, but still, take what is the best of all worlds, while establishing, coalitions so that we can prevent a chip shortage like the one we had, and at the same time enabling what is our goal when it comes to industrial policy, which is that European industry is leading when it comes to digitization and fighting climate change.
Great. I'm going to hand over to Lisa maybe after one or two more questions. So if anyone has any more questions, do submit them. You've got about 5 or so minutes. Can I ask you about state aid during the pandemic? Obviously, you sort of paused a lot of the restrictions for a few years to allow governments to kind of help companies through this quite extraordinary situation. You're kind of phasing out these kind of temporary state aid things. You laid out the kind of almost like a tapering, where I think up to the middle of 2022, and then there'll be a slightly different regime for 6 months or so. But even since I read that back in November, you've seen we've had a new variant flare up. Who knows? Maybe there'll be another one. If this thing becomes, if we have a cycle of strict lockdowns, new variants, what does state aid policy look like in that scenario when we have kind of recurrent flare ups? I mean, is there such thing as a kind of going back to normal, or would you support a further extension if that was necessary?
Well, first and foremost, I think the teams who have been taken with us in the Commission more than 900 decisions on state aid would be very sad if they heard you say that it has been paused, because we have used the flexibility that we have in the treaty when we have a crisis like this to enable member states to give absolutely necessary support when the state asks you close your door, basically to hibernate. Of course, they should also support you through this hibernation in order for healthy companies to survive. But the reason why we are still doing state aid control is to make sure that aid is not given in an unbalanced manner so that someone can just outspend others, because then we would, wake up after the pandemic, after this sort of hibernation, to a completely fragmented single market. So we have taken many decisions to make sure that everyone is online. Second, we have been following what kind of budget are we dealing with here. And I think for the European business community, it is really good that state has been willing to step up support. I think the total budget of approved aid is more than 3 trillion euros, and outside of that comes wage support and all kind of stuff. So that is the budget. That's the willingness to give support. But the situation has not been as bad as the budget would reflect. So actually, I think basically no more than a third of this budget has been used, which means that actually member states have not outspent each other. So we do think that we have a functioning single market to help us recover from the crisis. And I think you see it because you have seen a very strong sort of rebound in the European economy over the last year.
Interesting. Quite right to pull me up on the word pause. It's absolutely not a pause.
It's just they've been working from home, the teams, and they have been, incredibly, vigilant and productive in order to make sure that, aid could get out there where it was needed. So I really admire the work that's been done.
No, quite right. I feel like I get a release in my inbox every other day with a new kind of state aid thing. I want to just press you on that point about the level playing field, though, because I mean, you mentioned the 3 trillion figure, which, just to put it into context with the audience, I think was the kind of the notional possible amount of state aid that could have been granted based on member states, kind of the leeway they'd given themselves in the budget. So it's kind of difficult to use those numbers. But I mean, I was just doing a quick exercise based on some figures from the Commission, where based on that 3 trillion, it looked like Germany, France, Italy, and Spain were 84% of that, roughly. Now, as you say, not all of that 3 trillion was used, but there are other studies that suggest that Germany and France have accounted for an outsized proportion relative to GDP. Particularly Germany, that stands to reason. They have a lot of fiscal space in order to help companies. When you look at the numbers, do you really feel confident that there isn't there hasn't been some people outspending each other here?
Well, of course, we will keep following, because I don't think one should be confident in this matters, also because the pandemic is not completely over, even though my own country, Denmark, as from today, have ceased every restriction. But what we have seen when we look at the aid actually paid out, based on the numbers from the member states themselves, Germany is not in the lead. I think Italy is in the lead, with France close by.
Yeah. But Spain is pretty big as well.
That being said, you're right to say that the bigger countries, they have spent more than smaller countries. But so far still we don't see big discrepancies. And since European industry is indeed European, having your customers in one maybe bigger member state being in good shape also helps you if you're the supplier to that customer. So aid given in one member state may actually also indirectly help others, because it makes sure that the value chains and supply chains that they stay dynamic and in full function.
That's great. Thank you. I am going to hand over to Lisa now, who's been scrutinizing the audience questions and may have some of her own as well. Lisa, take it away.
Yes, thank you, Liam. So there's been a few questions coming through and a few more also appearing in my inbox. But I'd like Vice President to start, if I can, on a topic that we haven't discussed yet, and this is competition policy in telecommunication, in the telecommunication sector. So what is the Commissioner's view on further consolidation? I mean, in the past, Brussels has been opposed to in-country consolidation that would reduce service providers from 4 to 3. Has that view changed, particularly after the O2 Hutchinson judgment?
Well, we do not do magic numbers. We do market analysis, and we have seen a lot of sort of consolidation from fixed to mobile to fiber coming together. Where we get sort of a bit nervous is if we see that there will be very limited choice for people within a national market, because that sort of thing is one of the real pain points of the European single market, that when it comes to telcos, the market are still quite national due to regulatory barriers, culture, habit. It's quite rare that people would have a subscription from a supplier in a neighboring market. So we would very much want to have, sort of pan-European consolidation to see if there can be a push for a more European market when it comes to the telcos, because that, I think, would give that kind of muscle that is indeed needed for the investment that is also prone to happen in the telco industry, for instance, in 5G.
But I mean, if I can just do a follow-up to this, I mean, I take your point that, the sector is still very much divided along national lines. But I mean, wouldn't it be possible to consider, slightly more consolidation at a point in time where these telecom providers have to spend a lot to upgrade their networks and extend the use of fiber, and they've also spent quite a lot on 5G technology. So wouldn't that be a fair trade-off in a way? I mean, the consumers get the new technology, but the operators are able to merge so that they can sustain the cost of that development.
Well, one of the things that has been really tricky is that so far, our experience still holds true, that it's competition that pushes for investment rather than consolidation pushing for investment. What we have done, because obviously I take part of your point, is, for instance, to try to encourage member states to do, sort of beauty contest when new frequencies are released for 5G. So instead of asking how much will you pay me, asking how fast and how broad will you deploy this frequency in order for the funding to remain in the companies winning the auctions. On that, we have not been very successful, but that would be one of the ways actually to have your cake and eat it, to have competition as a driver for more investment, while for some funds still to remain in the companies actually having their frequencies and having to do the investment.
I understand. Thanks for this explanation. Just maybe moving on to another topic. I mean, there's also some viewers who are asking you your view on a very interesting legal case, and that's the one that involves Epic and Apple in the United States. So are there any conclusions or insights that can be drawn, from that situation, which is still alive, that could be of interest to Europe?
Well, it is indeed still alive since both parties have appealed the judgment. We follow it with interest because it is indeed important to see how this both the question of hosting more app stores can be dealt with, sort of the payment systems to do so. You will know that we have our own cases when it comes to this, both a general case on the Apple App Store, the Spotify case, where Apple have an app competing on music streaming, and their app does not have to pay the fee, and they don't have the rules that they cannot, tell people that they could actually get the subscription cheaper if they took another venue. So we follow this with great interest. And last but not least, we will be now in the negotiations of the Digital Markets Act that would oblige you to be open for more app stores than your own if you're an operating system supplier. So we look with great interest of the US developments, but of course now it's difficult to say because the appeal will now be ongoing from both sides.
Understood. Obviously, still a live case. Maybe also touching on a slightly different topic, and this is the issue relating to the global corporate tax, which was finally agreed, after long discussions by OECD member states. So is that somehow, I mean, two questions may be linked to this topic. I mean, has the Commission carried out an evaluation of how that would impact the European Union, for instance? I mean, the Commission has gone after very aggressive tax deals, especially with tax giants. We remember one in Ireland, just to mention one. So, is there an assessment of how, this minimum tax changes things for Europe's coffers? And the second question linked to that is, does it mean that maybe we don't need digital taxes anymore because we have the global minimum tax?
We've been really active in order to get to this global compromise. And there are two sides to it. One is this 15% minimum effective taxation. And I think the word effective is really important here. And the second, which is sort of the distribution of taxing rights in different sort of tranches depending on company size. And both these sides together would solve a lot of things. And most obviously the sense that taxation should be more fair. That bigger companies should not escape contributing to the countries where they do their business and create value, and to sort of also put a limit to really aggressive tax competition. So we are, really, really stern supporters of this compromise, and we'll do what we can to implement it for a sense of fairness when it comes to taxation. I don't know if colleagues have calculated what it would bring to EU coffers or member states coffers, but I consider it a great progress. I think it's an historic deal. And of course, it would be even better if it was also globally implemented.
Indeed. And on the digital tax, I mean, just, my second question on whether the global corporate tax, somehow, the minimum corporate tax somehow takes off the shine or the need, let's say, to have digital taxes.
I think to a very large degree, some member states had indeed digital taxes, and it is part of the agreement to seize these taxes once these taxes have been implemented. So I think there is a balancing thing here. We have, but that's just a separate consideration, a consideration of own income for the European Union. And we made two proposals, but we have paused all our considerations about a digital levy, which is a different kind of tax, because now actually we might be able to implement this global compromise, and that would indeed be really, really good.
Indeed, thank you. So maybe just another question or two as we're sort of getting to the end of our conversation. There's a lot of interest also in the consolidation. I mean, from our views in the consolidation that we're seeing in the gaming industry. I mean, the latest Microsoft deal is, of course, what people have in mind. Is that something that will come under your radar screen? I mean, clearly you have explained to us that the Commission doesn't look like as the home base of the companies involved. I mean, is that something the Commission will review, and how do you assess, let's say, consolidation in the video gaming industry?
Well, I don't know. I don't think we know if it will be directly notifiable to us. That being said, in general, we work with member states in order to be able to see transactions that do not meet our thresholds for turnover. And an example of that would be the Facebook customer that was referred to us. So we try to broaden our view to see more deals in order to see what is happening in these markets. We will have no sort of specific view of the gaming industry. We want competition between gaming platforms as well as in any other market. But I find it, of course, very interesting because gaming is probably what is getting closer and closer to what is a real metaverse where you can have a presence. So both from sort of a market consolidation point of view and from a learning point of view about conditions of the metaverse, these are very interesting developments.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you. So we're getting close to the end. Maybe a final question again, which came from the readers. We have seen action, obviously, from the European Commission against some of these big tech companies, but individual EU states have also gone against. I mean, we had a recent case in Italy against Amazon, which was started. Germany, I think the antitrust authority there are investigating Apple and the Apple Store in particular. So how should we view, I mean, is this action coordinated by the European Commission? I do understand that there are, slight legal differences between the countries, but, isn't there a risk that if this is not coordinated, then there are mixed messages in a way given to consumers, and to everyone who's working in these segments?
Now, this is a very good point. We have always encouraged strong national competition authorities because we work together to enforce European competition law. Actually, I think in numbers, 85% of decisions within sort of or based on European competition law is taken by national competition authorities. And in the last mandate, we passed legislation actually to strengthen national competition authorities so that every citizen in Europe would have sort of the same minimum when it comes to strength of their national competition authorities to police the market. So we really appreciate the strength of authorities, and we have a system to coordinate what we're doing, because in some member states, they, on top of European competition law, they also have national specificities. And here, of course, it's really important that we are well coordinated. And for instance, in the Italian Amazon case, we have an Amazon case which is not just about distribution of goods, but also has a data side to it. But we have then carved out sort of the Italian part of the European market in order to make sure that they could do their case, but also that in all fairness, that we would not investigate Amazon behavior also in the Italian market when the Italian authorities were doing it.
I see. Okay, well, thank you for this explanation. I think on this note, I'm going to give back the floor to my colleague, Liam.
Thank you very much, Lisa, and thanks for your questions, audience members. I think we'll wrap it up there. I just want to say thank you very much for your time, Commissioner Vestager. It's really good to hear your thoughts.
And, well, it was my pleasure. It's really encouraging because competition law enforcement and competition in the marketplace is one of the solutions to digitalization, to fighting climate change, but of course also to have resilient supply chains, so that if one supplier has an issue, then you can turn to someone else. So it's indeed a pleasure to discuss it with you.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you very much. See you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.